There is something happening in your bedroom every single night that you have never once witnessed. Not something that happens occasionally, not something that requires special circumstances or particular holiness on your part. Something that has been happening without interruption, without pause, without a single exception, every night of your life since the moment you drew your first breath. And it will continue happening tonight, whether you know about it or not. But here is what I need you to understand before we go any further. The fact that it happens whether you know about it or not is not a comfort. It is a challenge. Because what your guardian angel does in the hours while you are sleeping is not a fixed, uniform activity that proceeds the same way regardless of the condition of your soul and your household. It is responsive. It is dynamic. And in ways that the Catholic mystical tradition documents with a precision that should make every person watching this stop cold. What happens in those invisible hours of the night over your sleeping body is directly shaped by choices you are making in the daylight hours that you probably do not realize are connected to your nighttime protection at all. I have been doing exorcism and deliverance ministry for a long time. I have worked cases that most priests never encounter and would prefer not to. And one of the things that pattern of work has taught me, one of the things I wish I could communicate to every Catholic family in the Western world right now, is this: the night is not neutral. The hours between when you close your eyes and when you open them again are not simply a biological pause in your day. They are a spiritual environment. And that environment is either being actively guarded, reinforced, and used for your soul's benefit in ways that are extraordinary and almost entirely unrecognized by modern Catholics, or it is something else entirely. Stay with me through everything I am about to share, because what I will lay out in the next several minutes is not devotional comfort. It is not the kind of thing you find on a prayer card. It is drawn from the specific, documented, theologically precise testimony of the tradition, from the mystics, from the doctors of the Church, from the accounts of saints who were granted direct awareness of what their guardian angels were doing in ways ordinary people are not. And it will answer a question you may have never thought to ask, but that, once asked, you will not be able to stop thinking about. What is your guardian angel actually doing right now, while you sleep? The night the tradition forgot to explain. Let me begin where all serious spiritual theology must begin, with what is actually real. The Catholic tradition does not treat sleep as a spiritual absence. The modern secular mind does. The modern mind treats sleep as a shutdown, a temporary cessation of personhood, a period of biological maintenance with no moral or spiritual dimension worth examining. You go unconscious, the world pauses, you return. This is the functional anthropology of most people living in the Western world today, including, I am sorry to say, most Western Catholics. The tradition teaches something radically different, and I want you to sit with the difference because it matters enormously. The soul does not sleep. This is not a metaphor, this is not pious language. The soul, as the principle of life and the seat of your immortal identity, does not enter a dormant state when your body loses consciousness. The soul continues. And because the soul continues, the guardian angel assigned to that soul continues its ministry without interruption. The angel does not clock out when you close your eyes. The angel does not reduce its attention, withdraw to a distance, or enter any equivalent of the rest state your body requires. The tradition is explicit. The guardian angel's ministry is unceasing. It has no off switch. But here is what that means for the hours of sleep. And here is where I want to take you into territory the contemporary church rarely explores with any depth, because it requires admitting something that makes comfortable Christianity deeply uncomfortable. If the soul continues through the night, and the guardian angel's ministry continues through the night, then something is happening in those hours. Real things, spiritually significant things, things with consequences that extend into the daylight hours of your waking life in ways most people never trace back to their origin. And the tradition has documented what those things are. I want to take you through them with the precision they deserve, because I believe most Catholics, good, sincere, practicing Catholics, have been living at a fraction of the spiritual protection available to them at night. Not because they have done something catastrophically wrong, but because no one has ever told them what the nighttime hours are actually for, what their guardian angel is actually doing in those hours, and what conditions in their waking lives are either unleashing that angelic activity to its full capacity or quietly throttling it down to almost nothing. What the tradition actually says. The mystical tradition of the Church, drawing from Scripture, from the Desert Fathers, from the great medieval theologians, and from the verified accounts of the saints, describes the sleeping hours as a period of what the older authors called the soul's vulnerability and the angel's intensification. I want to unpack both of those terms because they are both essential and both deeply misunderstood. The soul's vulnerability in sleep does not mean the soul is weak during sleep. It means the soul's rational, volitional faculties, the will and the intellect operating through the body's senses, are temporarily suspended. You cannot consciously choose during sleep. You cannot reason your way through a spiritual attack. You cannot deploy your will against a threat you cannot perceive. The natural defenses of a waking, rational soul are offline. The tradition has always taught that this creates a specific kind of spiritual exposure. Not exposure in the sense of weakness before God. God does not abandon you in sleep. But exposure in the sense that the normal, rational buffer between a soul and the suggestions of the spiritual world is not operating. The soul is open in a way it is not open during waking hours. Open to influence. Open to the movements of grace. Open to consolation. Open to the communications that God and His angels direct toward us. This is why the tradition so consistently associates the hours of the night with both the greatest spiritual gifts and the greatest spiritual dangers. The angel's intensification is the counterpart to this vulnerability. Precisely because the soul's rational defenses are offline, the guardian angel increases its protective activity during sleep. This is not a speculative claim. It is drawn from the consistent witness of those saints who were granted unusual awareness of their guardian's activity. The angel, freed from the need to mediate its communication through the soul's waking rational faculties, operates with a directness and an intimacy during sleep that it cannot exercise to the same degree when you are awake and busy and distracted. St. Francis de Sales wrote about this with a specificity that most people have missed because it is embedded in devotional literature that modern Catholics rarely read. He described the hours of sleep as the hours in which the guardian angel's work of what he called interior formation is most fully operative. The angel, he argued, is not merely watching over the body during sleep. The angel is actively working on the soul. Not in the soul, violating its freedom. The tradition is clear that angels cannot penetrate the will directly, but on the soul, in the same way that a skilled craftsman works on something precious and intricate in the hours when no one is interrupting and the conditions are quiet enough to permit careful work. The cure of Ars said something even more startling about this. He told his parishioners, ordinary farmers and villagers, not spiritual elites, that the grace a good person receives during a single night of sleep under the care of a guardian angel who is operating freely is greater than that person would estimate for an entire month of waking devotion. He was not minimizing the importance of waking prayer. He was trying to communicate something about the extraordinary capacity of the angelic ministry in those quiet hours that most people waste by failing to prepare for them. Do you hear what that means? I want you to hold that for a moment. What happens at night, spiritually, in a home where the conditions are right, in a soul where the conditions are right, is not a minor supplement to the spiritual life. It is one of its primary engines, and almost no one is talking about it. The three activities. I want to be specific with you about what the tradition identifies as the primary activities of the guardian angel during the hours of sleep, because specificity is what separates a genuine encounter with this teaching from a vague devotional feeling that dissipates by morning. The tradition identifies three primary activities, and I want to walk through each one not just as theological information, but as a diagnostic tool. Because each of these activities is either happening in your life in full force, or it is being hindered in specific identifiable ways, and you can know which is true. The first activity, protection from spiritual assault. The first thing your guardian angel does while you sleep is stand guard against the specific class of spiritual attacks that become more accessible during the hours of human unconsciousness. I want to be precise about what I mean and what I do not mean here, because this subject attracts a great deal of confusion. I am not describing the monsters under the bed imagery of popular superstition. I am describing something that the tradition, grounded in Scripture, confirmed in the experience of the exorcists and spiritual directors of the church across centuries, is very consistent about. The demonic world is real, it is active, and it operates with a strategic intelligence that specifically identifies the hours of human sleep as a period of heightened operational opportunity. The book of Psalms, and I want you to notice how the tradition has always read this psalm, describes God as the one who keeps watch over his people, who neither slumbers nor sleeps. Why would the psalmist emphasize that God does not sleep unless sleep were associated with a specific kind of vulnerability that needs a specific kind of counterpart vigilance? The angel assigned to your soul provides that counterpart vigilance. It is the localized, particular application of the divine protection the psalm celebrates. The Desert Fathers, the monks of the Egyptian and Syrian deserts in the early centuries of the Church, who had more direct, sustained encounter with demonic activity than perhaps any other group of Christians in history, write about the hours of the night with a remarkable consistency. They describe the period from approximately midnight to the early morning hours as the period of most intense spiritual combat. Not the only period, the most intense. And here is what is important. They do not describe this as a problem primarily for the monastically inclined. They describe it as a feature of the spiritual landscape that every Christian soul navigates, whether or not they are aware of navigating it. The monk who stays awake for the night office and prays through those hours is doing something more than maintaining a devotional schedule. He is standing watch in the visible realm at the same time his guardian angel stands watch in the invisible one. He is a conscious participant in something that is happening to every sleeping Christian, whether they participate consciously or not. The question is not whether the attack happens. The question is whether the guard is at full strength. And here is where the diagnostic becomes important, because I have encountered this pattern in ministry enough times to tell you with confidence that it is real and that it is more common than most people want to believe. A guardian angel standing watch over a soul that is in the state of grace, in a household that is consecrated, in a life that includes regular prayer. That angel operates with what the tradition calls full jurisdictional authority over the spiritual environment of that home. It can repel, it can intercept, it can actively work against the specific spiritual pressures that build against a soul during the night. A guardian angel standing watch over a soul that is in a state of serious, unconfessed sin, in a home where the sacramentals have been removed and prayer has ceased, in a life that has left open what the tradition calls doors, specific attachments to sin, to occult practice even in minor forms, to certain media and entertainment that has spiritually poisoned the household atmosphere. That angel is not absent. The love of the guardian for the soul it is assigned to does not fail, but its ability to exercise full protective authority is compromised, and the soul is exposed during those night hours in ways that manifest in waking life as things most people attribute to anything but their actual cause. Let me be specific about what that exposure looks like, because I want you to be able to recognize it. Persistent, inexplicable anxiety that peaks in the nighttime hours or immediately upon waking. Sleep disturbances that have no physiological explanation despite medical examination. A pattern of disturbing dreams that carry moral content. Dreams that tempt, that shame, that propose, that replay and reinforce exactly the attachments and weaknesses that the person is already struggling with in waking life. A sense of weight or oppression upon waking that takes hours to lift and that no amount of sleep seems to resolve. I am not saying every instance of these experiences has a spiritual cause. I am not advocating for spiritual explanation of what is genuinely physiological. What I am saying is that in the cases I have worked, where these patterns persist despite the absence of physical explanation, where they correlate with specific periods of spiritual neglect or moral compromise, where they lift consistently and rapidly after sacramental intervention, in those cases, the pattern is not coincidental. Something was getting through at night that the guardian angel was equipped to stop, but was being prevented from stopping by conditions the soul itself had created. The first activity of your guardian angel at night is protection. The question to ask yourself honestly is this: what is the spiritual condition of the space where you sleep? What is the spiritual condition of the soul that enters that space every night? Are you creating the conditions for full guardianship, or are you walking into those hours with vulnerabilities that are, in every spiritual sense, avoidable? The second activity, the ordering of the soul during sleep. The second activity is the one I find most theologically extraordinary, and I want to spend the most time here because I believe it is the least known and the most consequential for ordinary Christians living ordinary lives. The guardian angel, during the hours of sleep, engages in what the tradition calls the ordering of the soul. Let me explain what this means with the precision it requires, because this is not a vague concept. It is specific. The human soul, over the course of a day of waking life in a fallen world, accumulates what the tradition calls disorder. Not necessarily sin, though sin is the most serious form, but disorder in the broader sense. The disordering influence of sensory overload, the disordering effect of the passions being stimulated and not properly resolved, the disordering consequence of 1,000 small choices throughout the day that moved the soul slightly further from its proper orientation toward God and slightly closer to some created substitute. Anger that was indulged and not resolved. Anxiety that was fed by excessive consumption of news, entertainment, social comparison. Lust that was not in mortal sin, but was given enough attention throughout the day to create a kind of interior residue. Envy, pride, the subtle self-aggrandizement of digital life. All of it lands somewhere in the soul. All of it leaves a trace. The tradition does not teach that we go to sleep morally clean, simply because sleep is a biological reset. The soul carries the day's accumulation into the night. But here is what the tradition does teach, and what I want you to hold as something genuinely remarkable. The guardian angel uses the hours of sleep to work on that disorder. St. Thomas Aquinas, working from the earlier tradition, describes the angel's capacity to act on the sensory and imaginative faculties of the soul with a precision that is remarkable. The angel cannot directly move the will. That remains always free. But the angel can act on what Thomas calls the lower powers of the soul, the imagination, the sense memory, the emotional dispositions, in ways that prepare the soul for the movement of grace. Think of it as spiritual preparation. The angel works in those hours to reorder what the day has disordered, to settle what the day has agitated, to strengthen what the day has weakened. This is why, and this is a connection I want you to make, because it is documented in the tradition and almost never spoken of in contemporary Catholic formation. This is why the quality of prayer you do before sleep is not merely about ending your day well. It is about what you are handing to your guardian angel to work with during the 8 hours that follow. Let me say that again because I do not want it to pass unnoticed. The prayer you do before sleep, the examination of conscience, the act of contrition, the specific petition to your guardian angel for the protection and ordering of your soul during the night, is not closing a door. It is opening one. It is an act of deliberate, conscious cooperation with what your angel is about to spend the next several hours doing. And the tradition's consistent witness is that the angel's capacity to do that work is dramatically different when the soul has consciously, intentionally, and prayerfully invited that ministry than when the soul has simply lost consciousness after an evening of passive entertainment with no spiritual preparation whatsoever. Think about what you are doing in the average evening before sleep? What has been going into your imagination in the 2 to 3 hours before you close your eyes? What emotional states have you been cultivating or allowing to cultivate themselves through the content you have been consuming? What is the state of your conscience, not in a scrupulous sense, but in the honest sense, when your head touches the pillow? Because your guardian angel does not receive a blank slate at night. It receives whatever you have handed it at the end of the day. And what it receives shapes what it can do. The Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, one of the Church's most remarkable mystical visionaries, describes in her accounts something that stopped me when I first encountered it. She describes the angel's work during sleep as being similar to what a devoted physician does for an unconscious patient, but a physician who operates at the level of the soul rather than the body. The angel attends. It applies what it knows of divine mercy and grace to the specific wounds and disorders of the specific soul it is assigned to. It is not generic ministry. It is personal, intimate, responsive to the exact shape of this particular soul's exact condition on this particular night. She describes this as one of the most tender expressions of divine love in the created order, that God would assign to each soul a being of this intelligence, this power, this dedication, to attend to it through the dark hours when the soul itself cannot attend to its own needs. I have thought about that image many times in the context of this ministry, a physician attending an unconscious patient with care and precision. That is what is available to you every night. The question, and it is the same diagnostic question that runs through everything in this subject, is whether you have created the conditions in which that physician can work freely, or whether you have left the operating environment so compromised that the physician can do almost nothing with what it has been given. The third activity, preparation for the following day. The third activity of the guardian angel during sleep is the one most directly visible in waking life, which makes it both the most verifiable and the most commonly misattributed. The guardian angel uses the hours of your sleep to prepare the path for the following day. I want to be precise about what this means because it is easy for this to sound like comfortable superstition, and I refuse to let it remain at that level. The tradition's account of this is specific, and it is grounded in a serious theology of divine providence. The Catholic tradition has always taught that God governs the created world through secondary causes, through the ordered operation of natural laws, through the free choices of human persons, and through the ministry of angels acting as agents of particular providence. The guardian angel is not an observer of your life. It is a participant in it. And participation in a life does not begin when the alarm clock rings. It includes the preparation that happens in the hours before you open your eyes. The tradition identifies three specific forms this preparation takes. The first is what the older theologians called the illumination of the path. The angels work during sleep to influence the circumstances and encounters that will present themselves in the following day in ways that orient the soul toward the choices God wants it to make. The angel cannot determine those choices. The will is always free. But the angel can work in the hours of the night to arrange, to position, to create the conditions in which the grace that is coming in the following day can be received. The second is what the tradition calls the strengthening of the rational soul for the demands of the coming day. Sleep is not merely physical rest in the tradition's understanding. It is also a period of spiritual replenishment that the angel actively superintends. The soul that wakes with inexplicable clarity, with a sudden resolution to a problem that seemed insoluble the night before, with a renewed sense of spiritual direction after a period of confusion. The tradition attributes this not to the random operations of the resting brain, but to the deliberate ministry of the guardian angel, using the hours of unconsciousness to do what it cannot do as easily when the rational faculties are operating and busy. St. John Bosco, whose dream life was documented and examined by the Church with great care, described the guidance he received through the night hours as the single most consistent source of direction for his apostolic work. Not in the dramatic sense of visionary revelation, though some of his experiences were extraordinary, but in the ordinary sense of waking with clarity he had not had when he went to sleep. Clarity about decisions, clarity about particular souls in his care, clarity about directions to pursue and dangers to avoid. He attributed this with absolute consistency to the work of his guardian angel in the hours of sleep, working on his soul in the quiet that waking life does not permit. The third form of preparation is what I consider the most practically urgent for families with children in the current cultural moment. The guardian angel, during the hours of sleep, works specifically to reinforce the moral and spiritual formation that has been built into a soul during the waking hours. I want you to hear the full weight of this because I believe it is one of the most important things I can say to a parent right now. The formation you give your children during the day, the catechesis, the prayer, the moral instruction, the example, does not simply sit static in their souls waiting to be acted on. It is worked with, it is deepened, it is reinforced and integrated and connected to the natural architecture of their interior life during the hours of sleep, specifically through the ministry of their guardian angel. The child who goes to sleep with prayer, whose guardian angel is operating freely in a home that has been spiritually ordered, is receiving during the night hours a deepening of the day's formation that is entirely invisible to the parents, but that accumulates over months and years into a spiritual character of extraordinary resilience. The child who goes to sleep without prayer, in a home where the spiritual environment has not been ordered, in a family where the faith is practiced nominally or not at all, that child's guardian angel is present. It is working, but it is working against a current created by the household's own choices. And the formation that could have been reinforced and deepened in the night is instead fighting simply to survive in a spiritual environment that is actively working against it. I will tell you what I have observed in ministry across many years. I have sat with young adults, men and women in their 20s and 30s, who grew up in Catholic homes, who attended Catholic schools, who received all the sacraments, and who nonetheless lost the faith in ways that seem inexplicable to their parents. And when I work backwards through their formation, one of the consistent patterns I find is a childhood home where the spiritual ordering of the night was never established, where the day's formation was real, but the night was left unattended, where no one ever taught them to speak to their guardian angel before sleep, to make an act of contrition, to consciously invite the angel's ministry into the hours of unconsciousness. The formation was planted during the day, but the soil was never tended at night. And over years, what was planted thinned out and eventually disappeared. This is not inevitable. This is reversible, and it begins tonight. The deeper question. I want to stop here and say something I have been building toward through everything I have shared.